All right. Thank you, Angela. Hello, everyone. Greetings. Happy Pride. And thank you all for joining. As you can tell from the rainbows everywhere, I am the chair of the Global LGBTQ plus caucus. The plus is for premium. And my glitter spewing unicorn is just off camera. So I couldn't squeeze him in here to add to all the rainbows. My name is Bob Valier, rhymes with queer. I'm very pleased today to welcome you to this event co-sponsored by the LGBTQ Caucus and the Wisconsin State Team in observance of Pride Month. We're very excited that once again, Senator Tammy Baldwin has agreed to join us for a chat about the state of LGBTQ rights in the US, about Wisconsin politics, and the importance of this year's election. This is the fourth annual visit from Senator Baldwin, and we're always excited when she comes to see us. Next year, we're going to have t-shirts made. I don't want to take up any time except to note that at the end of this call, there will be a one-on-one Zoom voter assistance available. So if you need help registering to vote or requesting a ballot, stick around. There'll be a link in the chat box. And I also want to announce at the outset that this is an event for Pride Month. We have another one coming up in just 2 days. It's the screening of a film called How to Survive a Plague, and I'm putting the link to RSVP to this in the chat box right now. It's sponsored by the LGBT Caucus of Spain. So please, make some popcorn and come to that as well. Now, like I said, I don't want to take up any time, so let me pass the word right away to our international chair, Martha McDevitt Pugh, who will introduce the senator. Welcome, everyone, and hello, Martha.
Thank you so much, Bob, for kicking us off. And I'm really delighted as Democrats Abroad and our LGBTQ plus caucus are holding the fourth annual Pride Month webinar with Senator Tammy Baldwin. Really grateful that Senator Baldwin has been able to join us again this year to speak, as we do each year, about progress, opportunities, and also the challenges for the LGBTQ plus equality in our country and other issues that matter to Americans abroad. And I'm delighted to have the senator with us to cheer on our Wisconsin voters and the Wisconsin State Team in their important work to mobilize Wisconsinites around the world, such an important state this year in many ways, and make sure that Wisconsinites abroad know how to vote, that they can vote, and that their vote can make a difference. Wisconsin is on our list of states that we must win this cycle, both the presidency and to hold a Democratic Senate seat. So a few words about our speaker. Senator Tammy Baldwin is an American lawyer and a politician, serving as a junior U.S. Senator from Wisconsin since January 2013. A member of the Democratic Party, she has served 3 terms in the Wisconsin State Assembly, representing the 78th District, and from 1999 to 2013, represented Wisconsin's 2nd Congressional District in the House of Representatives. In 1998, Baldwin was elected as the state's first female member of Congress and the nation's first openly gay challenger sent to Congress. In 2012, Baldwin became the first woman Wisconsin had sent to the Senate and the first openly gay member ever elected to the Senate. Tammy Baldwin was reelected in 2018 by a near historic margin of 10.5 points. In the Senate, Senator Baldwin has worked closely with the Wisconsin business community to build a made-in-Wisconsin economy and drive economic growth. She has championed reforms for lowering costs and expanding access to healthcare, taking on Wall Street and the special interests that are calling the shots in Washington, and standing up for Wisconsin. So thank you for joining us today, Senator Baldwin, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Martha and Bob, and all of you who are joining today. Happy Pride, everyone. So I want to just share the sort of things that I think of when I am enjoying Pride Month. And, I start usually with reflecting on our history of progress in the US and thinking about and paying homage to the leaders and path makers who went before us, who made a lot of the freedoms and rights that we have achieved possible. We celebrate Pride in June because of Stonewall. And I think of those who courageously, at their own risk, spoke out and called for an end to the routine violence that it was occasioned upon them for just being who they are and seeking a place where they could be who they are. I also think about my young self when I was about to embark upon a career in public service. I graduated from Smith College in 1984. I just went to my 40th reunion. That really dates me, but in any event, um, I graduated and I returned home to Madison, Wisconsin, and I had studied politics, political science, government while at Smith College. I knew I wanted to get involved in public service, but I also came out when I was in college. And I thought to myself back then, wow, I might have to make a choice between pursuing the calling that I felt I had or living my life authentically and not hiding who I am. And because of a few extraordinary role models that I had a chance to meet and be mentored by, I figured out I could do both, that I could run for office, I could be out in the process, and I could win. And that's exactly what happened. And I am grateful to this day to those mentors, those role models, and also deeply aware that because of the opportunities that I've gotten, that I become that role model to others. And I want to say for those of you on this call that that's true of many of you also, that because you may not necessarily the way I have gotten little notes or reminders that said, hey, because I saw you doing what you do, I felt like I could also reach for the stars or take the next step. But that is the impact that we all have. So I just want you to internalize that important thing. So I may have, in many cases, been the first, but in my first run for office, I wasn't because of those role models who had been elected to office prior to me and showed me a path that I could achieve. I also feel like during this career, I've had the opportunity to see so much progress. By way of an example, when I was first elected to the Dane County Board of Supervisors, we had a gathering, this is in 1986, a gathering that fall of all the openly gay and lesbian elected officials. And we invited everyone we had learned about throughout the world. And that first convening, there were 14, 15 of us, and we called ourselves international because we had a member of the British Parliament come and join the rest of us. And we counted up the folks who we had learned were in office but weren't able to attend our event, and figured at that time in 1986 that there were about 24 openly gay and lesbian elected officials in the world that we had learned about. Today, because of organizations throughout the globe, but certainly some of them based in the US, who have done candidate recruitment and training and helped people seek office, we have well over 1,000 in the US, and globally, certainly the number has grown also. And that's a game changer in terms of having a seat at the table and having a voice. But in those early days when there were so few of us, success politically might have been just drafting a bill and introducing it and finding a couple, co-sponsors for it. And then it became stories of actually passing legislation and achieving victories in the courts, et cetera. I was in the House of Representatives when we saw some of our first major civil rights legislation advance, or getting rid of archaic things that we wanted to get rid of that were discriminatory in nature. So passing the Matthew Shepard, James Byrd Hate Crimes Protection Act happened when I was in the House of Representatives. Seeing the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell happened a few years later when I was in the House of Representatives. And, we've seen this steady advance, but every time I think we see advances, we also see the pushback. And I want to acknowledge, again, as I celebrate Pride, that I think about the victories won, but also about the challenges that remain. And I want to just kind of close out with a couple of recent stories. You know, right before we went live to everybody, we were talking about there's, you know, an assault right now on LGBTQ plus rights, but also on women's rights in the US. And with the Dobbs decision that came out nearly, well, 2 years ago this month, where half of all Americans have fewer rights than their parents and grandparents because of overturning Roe versus Wade. I remember reading the decision and recognizing that the Supreme Court that we have right now in the US said, in their opinion, basically Roe was wrongly decided back in 1973 based on a constitutional right to privacy, but no such right could exist because the word privacy doesn't occur or appear in our US Constitution. And I thought back to my time in law school and all the cases I read. I said, that's not the only one that was decided based on a right to privacy. Contraception access was based on a right to privacy. Interracial marriage was based on a right to privacy. Same-sex marriage. And while before that, the Lawrence case, which dealt with intimate conduct between consenting adults, and then the Obergefell decision dealing with same-sex marriage, all decided based on a right to privacy. And I think people immediately feared that they're not stopping with overturning Roe versus Wade. They're starting there. And so we got to work. And so one happy story I want to share is the passage of the Respect for Marriage Act. In the wake of Dobbs, when it was clear that interracial marriage and same-sex marriage were under imminent threat, we passed a bill called the Respect for Marriage Act. It was a bill that basically said, should a future Supreme Court reverse those two cases, Loving and Obergefell, that if you have a valid marriage either already entered into or is entered into in the future, it must be respected by all 50 states and by the federal government. And when we introduced that measure, people said, in this deeply divided time, you have no chance in the Senate of being able to overcome a filibuster and actually get 60 votes necessary to pass this bill. And I said, just you watch. And we worked and we worked and we worked. And in the end, we persuaded 12 Republicans to join all 50 Democrats and pass the Respect for Marriage Act into law. And I share that story to say that even in very difficult, very divided times, we can still aspire to and do big things. And that was one such example, but much more work to do. So with that, I'm going to say again, happy Pride, everyone, and be happy to take your questions and engage in dialogue.
Thank you, Senator, for your thoughtful comments and for your generosity in taking the time to be with us today. I know in politics, time is a precious, precious resource. So thank you very much for spending some of that resource with us today. I'm glad that you have a couple of minutes for questions here, and I'm just gonna make an executive decision and reverse questions 1 and 3 because you were just talking in that vein. So it'll be a way to sort of prolong the conversation that you began there by talking about the right to privacy and Roe and Obergefell. You know, Thomas and Alito already signaled that their sights are set on marriage equality and contraception. Interestingly, not on Loving. I don't know why they didn't mention that exactly. And you talk about the Respect for Marriage Act and the Herculean effort that you made to get those 12 Republicans. That effort involved some compromises that you had to make, some compromises about, for example, legitimate religious exceptions. And so I'm wondering if the Respect for Marriage Act is sufficient to guarantee the rights and privileges accrued to same-sex marriage under Obergefell and withstand a decision from the Supreme Court regarding marriage equality, and even if the Respect for Marriage Act could withstand scrutiny from the Supreme Court as it currently is. Hopefully it won't be that way for long, but right. if not, then what more is needed?
So let me start with just my statement that I do believe that the Respect for Marriage Act will do the job. And despite the fact that in the Dobbs decision, Justice Thomas, in his concurring opinion, actually called out the contraception case, the Lawrence case dealing with consensual intimate contact, and Obergefell. And as you mentioned, he conveniently left out Loving, which is interracial marriage, but he called out the others and suggested, almost invited litigators to bring new cases back to this Supreme Court. Which is part of the reason why we felt compelled that we needed to do something. And I will tell you, at every step of the way with the Respect for Marriage Act, that we had the greatest legal minds in our movement, scrutinizing the legislation, the amendments that were being proposed, et cetera, and really felt like this was the vehicle to make sure that we were going to protect interracial and same-sex marriages. And these were the folks who like argued Windsor and who argued Obergefell, were very, very much involved in the case. In terms of the compromises, I'd love to tell you a little bit about the path to this, because I really felt that there were a number of my Republican colleagues who very much wanted to get to yes on this. And why? Well, the power of our movement from the very beginning has been our visibility. I don't think it's an exact quote of Harvey Milk, but it was sort of always attributed to him, this sort of come out wherever you are. And it is that will begin to change hearts and minds. And I think that over time, as we've seen marriage equality come first to some states and then to the everywhere in the country, I have Republican colleagues who know and love people who are gay and who are married, right? And it might be people on their staff, it might be people in their extended families, people that they go to church with. I mean, their neighbors. They now have people in their lives that they care about, and they wanted to get to yes. And so what did they need to get to yes? And we did a lot of listening, as one does when you're trying to do that. And I think the primary concern that was raised, and I think a lot of this was coming from constituents of these senators saying, you can't possibly support that because it will weaken our religious liberties in the United States. And our early response was, no, it won't. This is like a status quo. It will do nothing to expand, nor nothing to contract religious liberties in the US. But some of them just wanted that clarified in writing, in the measure, and that's exactly what we did. We didn't expand it, we didn't contract it, but we basically said, look, you can point to that and you can show your constituents, sure, I can vote for this because it's not going to change anything with regard to the fundamentals relating to religious liberties in the United States. And the other thing the bill did, one line of the bill, but our favorite line, was it repealed the Defense of Marriage Act. So that's been repealed. And so that also strengthens any sort of future legal, because they can't be restored by a court, right? It's been, the Congress has gotten rid of it. So I think we're in pretty good shape heading forward. And I hope that this will result in Alito and Clarence Thomas backing down from their continual remarks in various settings to urge relitigation of the cases.
Great, thank you so much. So the next question Martha is going to ask.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, so Senator, on the topic of legislation, the Equality Act was reintroduced in the House last year, and it'll presumably be reintroduced again in the next Congress. Will we be able to pass it into law if we win both houses? And what if we win only one? And follow on, what can ordinary citizens, including those living abroad, do to help see this important piece of legislation become law?
Yeah. So I have a lot of comments on this, and I want to share a quick little story that goes, based on the last question we were talking about with respect for marriage. So part of the reason why I feel like I had some real ability to persuade some of the Republicans that I did to get on board with the Respect for Marriage Act is because I had already been meeting with a group of them, pretty much individually, but you know, a substantial number, trying to gauge where they would be on the Equality Act. Obviously, none had signed on to the Equality Act, so there were no Republicans on it. And obviously, we need to get up to 60 votes in order to overcome a filibuster. So I needed some of them. And I'm not going to divulge like private conversations, but sitting down with several and going through the provisions in the Equality Act and saying, what's keeping you from being a co-sponsor or from voting on it? And it was those conversations that then when we switched focus to, okay, now we need to pass the Respect for Marriage Act, I already had some experience talking in fair depth with some of these colleagues about all the array of issues that impact the LGBTQ plus community. What I would tell you, and I'm just going to be real frank with everybody about where we were. So, you know, prior to the Equality Act, we took sort of a piecemeal approach to trying to advance our rights. We had the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. We had several other smaller bills aimed at making progress in different areas. And we had gained, by the time we switched tactics and strategies, we had gained probably enough support to pass a transgender inclusive Employment Non-Discrimination Act, you know, through both houses. Then we got the Bostock decision, which is a U.S. Supreme Court decision prior to the more recent appointments to the Supreme Court, that declared in employment discrimination, the term gender discrimination should be inclusive of both sexual orientation and gender identity, therefore making it illegal everywhere in the United States to discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity in employment decisions in that context. That decision came down, and what I found as soon as that was law is that most of my Republican colleagues would be okay to codify that, which is partly what the Equality Act does. So the Equality Act deals with employment law, housing law, education law, public accommodations, jury, and credit. I think those are the 6 major provisions. And I think we could probably get consensus around 4 out of the 6 of those. But you have seen throughout the United States right now some pretty major debates around the educational provisions, Title IX in particular, issues of especially related to transgender Americans. And you have seen a lot also in very similar concerns, divisions related to public accommodations. And so I'm doing this granular analysis, and maybe people are bored with that, but the idea that I think those are going to be the toughest parts of the Equality Act, and then the strategic decision for the LGBTQ community is, do we ever get to a point where we get what we can and we codify employment protections, housing protections, you know, or do we say we are strongest when we stick together? And we probably only get everyone, you know, if we stick together. And so that's going to be something that we'll continue to talk about and continue to try to move ahead with. But I would say right now, when I see the local and state level and federal level pushback on LGBTQ rights, it's a really challenging time. I hope that these times will pass, and that my Republican colleagues will figure out that this is not an appropriate wedge issue that they're trying to market into their fundraising, et cetera. But it's really disappointing to see the pushback, and especially our most vulnerable youth who are taking, I think, the brunt of it.
Thank you so much. That's a great answer, and I'm glad that you remain hopeful. because I think we all must. I'm going to hand over to Annie from our Wisconsinites Abroad team for the next question. Go ahead, Annie.
Thank you, Martha. Thank you for your time, Senator. I wanted to ask you how the campaign is going this summer. And when you're out on the campaign trail talking to Wisconsinites, what are people most concerned about back home? What are the important issues for them? And maybe even for persuadable independents and Republicans, how can we talk to them and bring them over to the away from the dark side?
Yes, yes. Okay, so let me start with quickly about my campaign. I'm experiencing something that we're seeing across the swing states where there's Democratic senators running for re-election, and that's the recruitment of multi-millionaire self-financing opponents who may have, in some cases like mine, a tenuous relationship to the state. My opponent was born and raised in Wisconsin, but has spent his adult life, professional life, working either on the East Coast or the West Coast, most currently the West Coast. And he's self-financing his campaign, which means from day one, he had the resources to go up on television. And in a battleground state like Wisconsin, just having an R after your name starts you with about 45% of the vote. And so recognizing that, we have a lot of work to do. It's a real battleground state and going to be a very, very competitive race. So I really appreciate your giving me the opportunity to tell people about it. I will say in terms of top of mind issues in Wisconsin, really generally people are concerned about the high cost of things. And by the way, it doesn't help for me to say, oh, there's even more inflation elsewhere in the globe. We're actually doing okay, because they're still feeling it every time they go to the grocery store. And so we need to talk about, well, the true causes, which really is COVID, and then also be talking about the fact that it's Democrats who are fighting to lower prices and Republicans who are just pointing fingers and playing the blame game. And you know, we can have, there's so many different examples of how Democrats are fighting to lower costs, whether that's focus on bringing down the cost of prescription medications in our country, where their list price are 10, 15 times higher than they are in other parts of the globe, or whether that's bringing down the cost of paying for healthcare, childcare, lots of innovation and initiatives in that arena. And also just with regard to the grocery bill, calling out greed where it exists. There's a lot of reasons why prices haven't gone down as inflation has tempered in the United States. But another top of mind issue is reproductive choice, and especially in Wisconsin, because in the state of Wisconsin, we have on the books a criminal abortion ban that was passed in 1849, 1 year after Wisconsin became a state. It has created very horrific circumstances for people in our state, for women in our state. And not only do in many counties people have to be gravely ill or near death in order to get services, abortion services in Wisconsin, or make arrangements to travel at a crisis point in their life. But we're also losing medical professionals who are choosing to practice in states where they wouldn't risk prison or huge fines for doing what they were trained to do, which is provide care, health care. So there's a lot of ramifications. Wisconsinites are very concerned about reproductive freedom. And then lots of other issues, but I think those are the two that I hear the most. And I have a lot of things that I can show to show that I'm fighting on their side. And on all those issues, my opponent couldn't be more different or more opposite in his views. My opponent wants to repeal the Affordable Care Act. My opponent is 100% anti-choice. And so the voters will have a real contrast on their hand. But thanks again for that question.
Thank you.
That was some great on the ground Wisconsin insight there. Do you have time for one more, or do you have to?
I can quickly. I have another call that I need to jump on, but I can take one more if it's a quick one.
It's a quick one, and it allows you to tie together some things that you've already said. It's about the other guy, right? The other guy has said that if reelected, he'd reverse protections established by the Biden administration for LGBTQ youth and students in particular, for the whole community more generally. And if reelected, he's going to enact this thing called Project 2025, which John Oliver did an expose about this weekend. I recommend it to everyone. Now, he's not going to win. We are. Let's be clear about that. We're going to win. But if it does happen, what could we expect? And how can we respond? And even a little bit more broadly, to sort of incorporate a question from the participants gallery into this, how can we persuade our friends and relatives who are inclined in the other direction to come on board with us and prevent this from happening?
Yeah. So Project 2025 is sort of horrifying to consider. I remember the first I heard of it, somebody said they got a copy of it, and I'm like, how did you get it? And they're like, no, they're proud of it. It's posted on the internet. This is something they're not running from. But I think it also suggests how fragile our democracy is in the first place. We're talking about a man who wouldn't accept the results of an election, who led an insurrection on the Capitol during the time that we had gathered to count the electoral votes. And we're talking about somebody who has openly said in the intervening years that he would go after detractors. And so we're talking about a loss of the checks and balances that we rely on. And I'm very frightened. And I think that not only should we talk about the substantive aspects of 2025, but about the Project 2025, but also about what it means for the American experiment and the American idea and democracy itself. People have always looked to America as an example of democracy. And we would no longer be leading by example. We would, that would go away. Also, the president has, the former president, Donald Trump, has a very isolationist view of our role in the world. And so those of you who are abroad will know exactly how dangerous that is. I would, and talking to your relatives and friends back in the States, I would speak about this contrast in very strong terms. And if you're persuading somebody who is, not necessarily interested in re-electing Donald Trump, but is much maybe less enamored for some reason or other with our current president, I think that the thing that you should double down on is just what you're risking if you fail to vote or you fail to vote for Joe Biden, because the stakes could not be higher.
Well, on that note, which is all about just how important it is to vote, right? Let's take a moment to thank the senator for her time. And, we're honored every time that you come to spend a little bit of time here with us at Democrats Abroad. And for all those people out there in the participants gallery, if you're from Wisconsin, or if you know Wisconsinites abroad, or even if you know Wisconsinites at home, be sure to encourage them to vote this November for Senator Baldwin, for Joe Biden, and vote blue up and down the ticket, even for dog catcher. It makes a difference. And together we will be the margin of victory. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.